next week, June 16th and 17th, for the 9th East Africa International Arbitration Conference. It's the first time in nearly 3 years that the conference is taking place in person. No thanks to the global pandemic. The EAIAC was founded in 2013 around 5 guiding principles, and this year's summit will focus on a number of key areas. Jide Adeshokan is a Nigerian international arbitrator and a partner at Stephenson Harwood in London, and he joins me now to preview the conference. Thanks for coming through tonight. Jide, it's good to have you. Oh, let me ask you, you'll be having some coffee in Kigali next week, I'm sure. Perhaps you'll be trying out the new varieties.
I'll certainly be trying it. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I'm sure you folks will be having a lot of coffee. But again, very quickly, what's the chief focus of your conference next week?
Yeah, so thank you for having me again. It's really, as you said, it's the EAIAC's conference, and it's as you said, 9 years ago, this conference was started by 4 very bright women with a lot of foresight. Arbitration has grown in different parts of the world, and has led to the development of many economies. And these bright ladies had the foresight to create this conference, which really aimed to establish to grow arbitration excellence within Eastern Africa, but it's gone beyond that now. And I guess to answer your question, the focus of this conference will be to continue to build international arbitration capacity, the know-how and network for Eastern African lawyers, but also importantly for lawyers across the world and arbitration practitioners, not just lawyers around the world.
What has changed over the past 2 years that the conference could not hold in person due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess the immediate and obvious answer is the changes that COVID-19 brought about. We were forced to go online immediately. The younger arbitration practitioners were more adept at the technicalities of sharing screen, of being able to think on their feet online, and the older arbitration practitioners and arbitrators had to catch up. One other thing in relation to the same issue is green arbitrations. Last year we had COP26 and the whole talk of decarbonization. Instantly, COVID-19 led to that in arbitration. We because parties weren't flying all over the world, there was obviously a reduction in emissions from traveling for arbitration practitioners, but also there was a reduced number of paper. People just, because they were doing the arbitrations online, they learned to do their thinking, to do their reading. And many arbitrators have, as a matter of practice, said, "Don't send me any paper. I'll do all my reading online." 2 other things that maybe I should say. I mean, there's more recently the Russia-Ukraine crisis. That's also been a development that has led to, that has worsened. I think there were ongoing supply chain issues prior to the Russia-Ukraine crisis, but that's certainly worsened it. And you will have, I think, as a result of that, supply chain issues in wheat, in gas, LNG, that sort of thing. And I think we're likely to see many disputes as a result. And lastly, Bosun, just one other important trend over the last few years is the growth of third-party funding as a phenomenon. It has been around for a while, but there's definitely been an increased recognition of third-party funding recently. Nigeria, you may know, has recently passed its Arbitration Act, which has specific provisions on third-party funding, and we're going to see that in other African countries, in other institutions as well.
Interesting, some of these big issues in arbitration around Africa, but when it comes to government contracts, agreements, and treaties, and so on, these are high-powered, high-level issues that arbitration is never far away.
Indeed, you're absolutely right. Let me take, in a sense, one step back. There has been an increased recognition by African governments of the importance of arbitration to FDI into their countries, to the development of their economies, and to being perceived as good venues for investment. And so you see that a number of countries have taken steps to modernize their their laws in recent times. Tanzania and Ethiopia modernized their arbitration laws last year. As I said earlier, Nigeria passed its new arbitration act only this year. So you're right. These arbitration issues are important for the government, for African governments. Although coincidentally, I think African governments have seen a considerable reduction in the number of bilateral investment treaties that they've been signing over the last couple of years. The one exception is, of course, treaties or agreements that have been signed with the UK, for example. Since the UK left the EU, since Brexit, the UK has been signing up a number of, I believe they're called economic partnership agreements with countries all over the world, including particularly African countries, particularly former Commonwealth countries. And of course, the big elephant in the room, the big African elephant in the room is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which I'm sure we're going to discuss. But that has been a significant development treaty wise.
Yes, so how are you arbitrators, professionals positioning for what will come up under the new Trafficker Trade Agreement or the EFCFTA?
You're right. It's going to be. I think it's a great opportunity, not just for the continent. It is going to improve trade across the continent, no doubt. But as your question indicates, it's a great opportunity for the clever to position themselves properly for its provisions, for its dispute resolution provisions in particular. There is, of course, what it does is it has a mechanism for interstate settlements of disputes. Investors, there are no provisions at the moment for investor-state settlement disputes, which is what occurs in certainly some other parts of the world. And so investors will be concerned. But I believe that those at the Secretariat are grappling with this issue, and I believe that there are negotiations going on to address the concerns of investors when if any disputes arise out of the AFCFTA.
In what sectors, if we move into business, in what sectors or industries are we seeing most issues that require arbitration in Africa? Is it in oil and gas? Is it in commodities, as in mining resources? Is it in digital technology space? Or is it in fintech?
Yes, it's all those. But I want to come on to fintech later. But you're right. The traditional sectors in which you've seen African disputes arise continue to remain major sources of arbitrations: energy, manufacturing, mining, construction. Because of the infrastructure deficit in Africa, you're going to have a lot of big infrastructure projects. Well, you hope you would have a lot of big infrastructure projects, and there would inevitably be fallouts from those, and you have disputes in that, as well as banking and finance. But you mentioned fintech, and I think that's you're right to. I always say where the money is going into today is where you'll have disputes tomorrow. I think at the moment we know of quite a few big fintech so-called unicorns, not just in Nigeria, but all over Africa, in Kenya, in North Africa, South Africa as well. It's funding going into those companies now. I expect that you would soon start to have some sort of consolidation, mergers and acquisitions, maybe. And then inevitably, as the trend is, disputes will follow. So you'd have that, and then the other areas that I think that we're likely to have disputes. I've spoken to someone recently who was involved in a cryptocurrency arbitration, which I think will be exciting, and renewables. There's no doubt. I mentioned COP26 earlier. There are a few African and non-African investors who are pouring money into renewables in Africa. And I imagine that in time we'll see disputes arising out of that.
Interesting now that you mentioned cryptocurrencies. It's a brand new word for every one of us on the planet alive today when it comes to the world of crypto. So what about competence and professionalism in the field of international arbitration? How would you rate the stock of arbitrators in sub-Saharan Africa? Would this be part of what you folks will be talking about next week?
Yes, thank you, Bosun. It's something that arises in every conference I've been to on the continent. But to answer your question, first of all, I would rate African arbitrators as good as any other, particularly when given the right opportunities. Indeed, some of the arbitrators that have some of the most experience and some of the arbitrators that I admire are African. But I think also, there's no doubt there's a clamor to have more African arbitrators. I think the institutions, the many institutions that we have on the continent, have their part to play. But I think practitioners, African arbitration practitioners, and those who aspire to be more involved should also be aware of various initiatives going on. I know that many institutions, many of the international institutions, the LCIA in London, ICC in Paris, desire to have a more diverse selection of arbitrators, and also desire to have more first-time arbitrator appointments. And I think this is an avenue that aspiring arbitration practitioners need to be aware of. There's also this thing called an African promise in arbitration, which is a promise, a pledge drafted by three Africans that aims to improve the profile and representation of African arbitrators in arbitration generally, but particularly in arbitrations that arise out of Africa. And there are several other initiatives. There's a great academy that's ongoing now in London, where about 30 young arbitration practitioners are in London, being trained at the leading law firms of London. So there are quite a few of them, including quite a few that I should say that my firm are involved in as well.
It's going to be an exciting time for all of you in Kigali next week. We thank you for your time tonight on the show. Jide Adeshokan, partner at Sevenson Harwood in London. Enjoy your weekend and wish you all the best as you go to Kigali.